Just before we get on to the event proper, just a couple of updates. A couple of updates in the Retrofit Academy, really. There's been an awful lot happening, and I just wanted to bring you up to speed with a couple of things. Firstly, in terms of our qualifications, almost all of you on this call are probably retrofit coordinators or training towards becoming retrofit coordinators. That's what we're best known for at the Retrofit Academy, but it's never been the extent of our ambitions. By the end of this year, we will have a set of qualifications covering all of the key PAS 2035 roles. And a little bit beyond that. So for the whole of this year, we've been offering the NOCN Level 2 Understanding Domestic Retrofits course. We've just finished the development of a Level 3 award in retrofit advice. That's just going through the off-qual process, but that will be rolled out from the start of next year. We've developed a Level 4 award in retrofit assessment, which is self-explanatory, but it's an upskilling course for DEAs specifically around retrofit assessment, and that's a nationally regulated qualification, first of its kind, and then of course Level 5 diploma in retrofit coordination and risk management. So a lot more training. In addition to that, we are working very closely with the SHDF and LADS programs. So we're doing some very interesting projects around those, both on behalf of both government and industry. So lots and lots going on. In terms of opportunities, in terms of funding at the minute, I'm hoping to have some big news in the next week or so. Our friends in government have been a little bit slow on something called the Community Renewal Fund, which we've had sort of provisional approval on, but we're waiting for the Chancellor's green light in next Wednesday's autumn statement on it. And I hope to have some really big news following on from that. Until then, the funding that we have available is in Manchester. Having said it's in Manchester, it's funding from the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, but the funding restrictions are fairly loose on this one. So if you're based in the Manchester area, you'll be fine. If you've been involved in projects in Manchester in the last few years, you're likely to be fine. If your company has an office in the Greater Manchester area, you'll be fine. So you see, it's fairly open. Now we've got £600,000 available through to the end of July next year to get people through those qualifications that I showed you previously. So all of those. The application window is open for that. Limited numbers, obviously, and we'd really encourage you to take advantage of that if you possibly can. We'll share this link to the registration page when we send out the video link as well. So don't worry about scribbling it down now. The Centre of Excellence that you are, for the most part, you're part of, has also sort of gone from strength to strength this year. We have over 500 members of that centre now, which is a mixture mainly of you, people like you, retrofit coordinators, lots of organisations who are on that sort of journey to whole house retrofit too. And the really big growth area for us in terms of membership has been local authorities. It's been the local authorities involved in LADS programs and needing that sort of direct support to help them, particularly around PAS, but lots of other sort of understanding of retrofit areas too. So now, if you're all busy people, if you haven't spent much time accessing the Centre of Excellence website using your membership login that you should all have, if you haven't, speak to Emily, our coordinator. There is an awful lot in there now, in the knowledge base, in the CPD library, in terms of the software we've developed, to the technical guides that we've written. So, there's over 100 assets in there that have been developed or have been identified to be of use to retrofit coordinators and the industry in whole house retrofit. So please take 5 minutes to have a browse around that and make the most of what at the end of the day is already available to you. Some examples there of some of the guidance we've written over the last 12 months, and the ventilation guide that Peter wrote is one of many examples, things that are very relevant to today's conversation. So that is a quick update on stuff. What we're here for today, the main course, if you like, is the Retrofit Coordinator Summit. And this is all about what we call dispelling myths and removing blockages to PAS 2035 compliant retrofit. And judging by the number of you in the room, I suspect this might be quite a hot topic, as we expected it would be. It came about, as you know, we organise these summits once a quarter, and the theme would have been much along these lines anyway. But we were asked by BEIS and a few industry organisations to organise this, really because a lot of the issues that were surfacing, we're going to hear about quite a lot of those issues today, were considered to involve retrofit coordinators, and it was necessary to provide some clarity and guidance to retrofit coordinators on what you should and shouldn't be doing. Some of those issues, it was fairly clear, are just things that need to be clarified, and others are much more complicated and meaty and need to be discussed. So with me to look at these issues today is this fantastic panel. I think they're all here. I'm quite sure about Colin. I'll keep my fingers crossed. And it's some familiar names to you, I'm sure. In terms of our panel, we have Peter Rickaby, Colin King and Phil Mason, people you'll know well by now. And also we've invited Alice Monty from Angers, or it might be EQUANS now, actually, forgive me, Alice, and Derek Horrocks from Permarock and SBS to talk about the challenges they've faced on some particular SHDF and LADS projects. See if our panel is able to answer all the questions that are essentially holding up those projects or limiting their potential. That's the main focus of today. We're going to hear firstly, though, from Kate Duffy, who the head of policy on LADS at BEIS, and I believe HUG as well, Home Upgrade Grant. And we've asked Kate to, I suppose, whet our appetite for LADS, because there are big numbers and big ambitions around this policy. So if we're going to unblock all the blockages, we first want to understand what the prize is and what the opportunities are. So Kate, if you are able to share your screen, take over from me, that would be great.
Yeah, or it's actually being told that it's disabled, so that might be a problem. Okay. You might have to allow me to share my screen. Okay. But while we do that, maybe I'll just quickly introduce myself. So yeah, I'm Kate Duffy, so I'm the head of policy for the local authority delivery scheme across all the phases. I'm not actually the head of policy for the Home Upgrade Grant. That's my colleague James Kerry, who is not able to join us today. But I'm going to hopefully talk through all of the kind of noise that might be in the press recently, because obviously there's been a couple of big strategies that have been published, and if we can't get the slides up, it's not really a problem. I'll just talk through kind of what we've had, and then I can share them around after. Okay, you should be fine now. If you just try again. Let's have a go. You might have been lucky to escape death by PowerPoint, but are we? Yeah, we're fine. That's great. Thank you. We're fine. Okay. I was about to have to fill there, but we could have done it. So firstly, yeah, thank you for having me. I'm not a technical expert. I've kind of been around policy for quite a while, so I like to come in and listen to some of the real life solutions. So firstly, just thanks for having me, and I'm really interested to see the case study. So I've already introduced myself, so we can move on from there. So as I said, there's absolutely loads happening in the net zero space at the moment, and over the last week we've had two major strategies published, which was the net zero strategy and the heat and building strategy. And it really takes us back to what we're trying to do and the eyes on the prize kind of situation here. So I just wanted to kind of remind us of what the challenge is and what we're trying to do for these big government capital schemes, and also there's also the bill payer scheme for eco, but focusing today more on the capital schemes. So a lot of emissions are coming from domestic premises, about 15% of UK emissions. So there's really big changes that can be made and big gains to help with our climate change targets there. When we were looking at kind of the housing stock across England as well, we know that there's over 15 million that are below EPC Band D. And one of the big things that we have to really focus on, that over 50% of households living in these homes are in fuel poverty. So we're not only making strides towards climate change and our goals in that, we're also looking at our fuel poverty targets and helping to raise people out of fuel poverty and be able to afford their bills and to be able to afford other essentials as well. So it's balancing the package of what they're facing as challenges in their homes. So just kind of reframing on that, I just thought it was quite good to remember the differences that this can make in people's homes. So we've got the average cost for an EPC F4G has come in at over £2,000 a year. And actually, if you can raise the EPC to an A to a C, you're seeing a huge reduction in those costs for energy in that home, so energy and heating, down to around £650. So it's really big changes that we can make by changing the fabric and heating of these homes. So just recalibrating where we're starting from there. So you've probably seen in the news, there's been lots going on this week. We've had the net zero strategy that was launched, I think it was on the 18th, but the days have blurred into one. So I just wanted to pick out a couple of things that are coming through there. So there's obviously a key ambition that no new gas boilers are going to be sold after 2035. So we're really having to push to get ready for regulation. And a lot of the capital schemes and the new boiler upgrade scheme that are coming in are to help the cost reduction for creating a market for regulation as well. So at the moment, we're giving money and we're priming the pump of all these different measures and energy efficiency and low carbon heating, but regulations will follow. So this isn't something that's a kind of flash in the pan regulation or capital schemes. There is going to be things coming up in the future. So we're also looking at how do we stop being so reliant on fossil fuels. And we're seeing this winter that the price increases are really hitting households hard. And we need to think, how can we make sure that firstly, we're kind of smoothing peaks and troughs on the grid, but also making sure that we're reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, and that will help protect us from price fluctuations. Sorry, I can't speak today. It's been a long week. So lastly on that, I've mentioned about reducing energy bills. Never forget that it is around, helping people out of fuel poverty, but not just the costs and being warmer, healthier, reducing pressure on the NHS. There's a whole myriad of things that come through from making people's homes more efficient. So on the same day, we also launched the heat and building strategy. So this is more focused down and becomes part of our whole net zero strategy. And this is the thing that's kind of more focused on retrofit and helping domestic properties come up. So I won't go into lots of detail. There's lots on this slide pack, but as I said, I will send this around after if you want to have a bit of read about the wider context of what's happening. So just going into some of the response, I work on LAD. Historically, I worked on the energy company obligation as well. So that is, I'm sure you're all aware, a scheme that's funded for your energy bill payers, as well as the local authority delivery scheme, the home upgrade grant scheme, and also the social housing decarbonisation fund, lots of long names, are all funded through capital. So that's from Treasury, it's taxpayer money, but it's not going on to energy bills, as where ECO is an obligation on energy suppliers funded through energy bills. So as a package of measures, they're all trying to capture different segments of the market. So ECO tends to capture the lower, easier homes, so that those are things that energy suppliers can go in, kind of do mass delivery to meet legal obligations at the best price possible. With local authority, we're really trying to build up the supply chain in local areas, and that's not just building supply chain for retrofit, but it's building capability and capacity in local authorities to understand their housing stock. And that's the same for the home upgrade grant, but that's focusing just on off-gas, which are really hard, historically have been very hard for us to treat through things like ECO. I'm not going to go into detail on social housing today, but it's really important to be on there, and it's quite a big chunk of cash coming over the next 10 years. So as I said, I am leading up the local authority delivery scheme. I work on the policy side, so I have pulled my delivery colleagues to give me the correct numbers, so I have to be careful that I don't just kind of make things on the spot. So this was 500 million originally that went out through two phases. Phase one was 200 million, and that's brought in over 136 local authorities. So big consortia bids that have brought in loads of people to work together to spread the regional distribution of measures. And then 300 million going through the local energy hubs, and that's kind of brought in almost every, if not all, local authority in England. So that's really helped to bring local authorities in that had no experience of this in the past. So there's a lot of names, there's a lot of acronyms, so I just wanted to quickly give an overview of the timelines and what's happening. And you'll see this lovely, one of my wonderful colleagues pulled this together for me today. So we had LAD phase one was actually split into two phases. So phase 1A has actually come to an end, and we're doing close down on that. But what we have tried to do is mitigate things just being cut off mid-project. So where local authorities haven't quite finished delivery, they've been given recovery plans to make sure that any homes that are in the pipeline already have already been identified can be finished. So we're not just wasting money on surveys that aren't being used, and we're not wasting money on contracts that can't be finalised. So we're just wrapping that up as nicely as possible. LAD's phase 1B and phase 2 have actually now been extended all the way out to March 22. Aware that does go over the winter period, but it does give us another couple of months to do some of the kind of larger measures, so EWI and heat pumps, but also over the winter, simpler measures like loft insulation cavity can carry on, regardless if it goes under our magical 4 degrees. So underneath all of those things, we've got the new sustainable warmth competition that was launched in the summer. We're currently doing our final allocations. We're getting that all through Treasury, and we're hoping to get money out to local authorities in January. We expect delivery then to pick up in March. So we're hoping there's a taper off between phases 1B and 2 to pick up delivery and sustainable warmth. And because obviously you need time to get contracts in place, that Jan to March time should lead nicely into delivery. Underneath all of this, we've also got the home upgrade grant coming in. So sustainable warmth brought in the first stage of home upgrade grant and the third stage of LAD. And then the home upgrade grant is our future looking manifesto commitment that's going to run on all the way through to, I think it was 2025 that we have at the moment on that one. I'm aware of the time and I've got quite a bit to get through, so I might skip some and stop so we can get to the meaty stuff in the presentation. But just a quick update on what's actually happening in delivery. So in phase 1, there's a really strong push to identify households, and we had over 18,000 households which were identified and were found to be eligible. So that's checking things around the income eligibility and the EPC of the home. From that, we've had almost 8,000 measures delivered in over 6,000 households. What we have found, and really good learning from phase 1A, and which those of us that have been around for a while know that these things don't happen quickly. We've learnt that originally when phase 1 was set up, it had a very short delivery window. That has now been extended all the way out. And hopefully for future schemes, now we're moving out of single year spending reviews, we can have longer delivery windows. But the key thing that we took away from this is that there's households out there that are really keen to get measures in their homes, but we just have to make sure we've got enough time to go out and install multiple measures and bring those homes up. So phase 2, the hubs have confirmed that they've got almost 100% coverage across their regions. I think the minimum we've got is around 85%. And where we haven't got local authorities coming in through the hubs, it's normally because they're doing it themselves. So we do think that across the whole of England, local authorities really kind of grabbed onto this opportunity and moved forward. So like I said, that's over 300 local authorities working on that. So I did want to get into some of the risks mitigations, and I'm aware I'm just out of time, but I'll cover this off and then I'll ask David if he wants me to continue or stop. But it's really important. I think as government, we can quite often come and say, oh, isn't this fabulous? You've got lots of money, and we don't often talk about some of the actual delivery risks, and we can shy away from some of the negative stuff. So one of the big risks from us as policymakers was that local authorities weren't able to deliver their target number of homes. And I think the risk about this is around reputation. We've obviously had some issues around the Green Home Grants voucher scheme. And when a scheme is seen as a failure or it's not meeting targets, that can have a big knock-on effect for future policy and how households and industry kind of engage in that. So what we have done already, I've talked about extensions to the scheme. I think that's probably the biggest thing that we could have done. But we're also assessing lots of different winter scenarios, everything from kind of as it is now through to lockdowns, God forbid, bad flu season, anything that might actually constrain delivery even further, and thinking about how we can maximise delivery in each of these different scenarios. And we're working through that as quickly as possible. Talking around that, we also have, obviously, COVID really did restrict the scheme in the first few months. And I think that's why we saw quite a slow start to the scheme. If you think about when this was all kicked off, we were kind of in the peak, one of the first peaks of COVID. So people didn't want people in their homes. So we're trying to make sure we're monitoring those cases and we're feeding it into all of our scenarios. The key thing, you guys will be aware of it, insufficient supply chain capacity. But that's not just about the people, it's also about materials. It's about getting drivers to get materials to places. I think for heat pumps, we're seeing a shortage of chips that are needed to build heat pumps. So although we've got lots of people wanting them, the actual materials and bringing them together aren't quite lining up. So we've got a new supply chain team in BEIS are looking across all of our schemes and trying to see how can we help the market deal with these problems, understanding that a lot of that is outside of our control. But if there's things that we can do, such as allow local authorities and projects to change the measure mixes that they're doing in homes, so the measures that they can get and the materials they can get, they can go ahead with, And anything where there's a longer wait, we can put that into future delivery. So then a few things related to that, talking about extended time for setting up contracts, looking at price inflation. Is price inflation just us getting along to the new requirements of things such as PAS, or are we just seeing a spike because we flushed a load of money into the market? You know, I think it was 2 billion when vouchers came in, and it's going to settle. So there's just lots of different things that we need to look in there. So I'll take a breath there, David. I know we started a little bit late, but I really want us to get into the meat of the case study. So
okay. How much more do you have left, Kate? Would you
I could talk for days, but I think we've got some key lessons and supply chain risk. So I think I'm happy to share this, and then, or if we've got time at the end, we can come back to any of that.
I think it would be really great to hear those key lessons, Kate. Would you perhaps just do that slide for us? I think that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so I think this is really related to what we were talking about, what I was just talking about on the risks and mitigations. And I think because we've now had lots of phases, so we started with phase 1A, phase 1B, phase 2, sustainable warmth, it's about, instead of just doing the same thing over and over again, how are we able to tweak those phases to actually help the market to deliver? So one of the key things is the winter period. So it's fast approaching. It's not been the best summer as well. So we've probably not had the most delivery of those key measures, such as EWI heat pumps, we would have wanted. So as we're going into that, we're doing some early modelling of how we're going to deal with that. I talked a bit about supply chain constraints. You'll all be aware, external wall is one of them. And we talked about heat pumps, but I think it's also things that maybe we hadn't quite considered. So we've been talking to a lot of suppliers and installers and local authorities in the scheme. And there's lots of people who are asking for heat pumps, are really keen. They might have seen adverts, they might have heard their friends talking about it. But actually, when you get into kind of urban areas, having enough space next to a building or being within the controls around noise has really stopped a lot of delivery in areas where people are really keen. So there's really technical issues that we're trying to grapple with as we're rolling out these schemes. And if you find, what we find in the schemes, if there's a load of areas where they thought, oh, we've got loads of people that want heat pumps, but physically it's not possible to do, how can we rebalance and find new homes quickly enough to deliver measures in suitable homes? Because as we know, and as retrofit coordinators know, you've got to put the right measure in the right house, and we have to be really careful. We're not forcing measures into situations where they don't work. So what we're doing with that is really keeping an eye on actuals. Every month we're touching in with local authorities to get feedback on what's happening on the ground and trying to feed that into our forecasting. We're then using that to go to the ministers and talk about any extensions, which we've done over the scheme, but also feeding into the future schemes such as the home upgrade grant, which has got another 900 million from the that's just announced in October coming. We talked about price increases, supply chain shortages. Again, I can't speak, but the main thing we've been doing of that is set up a really kind of robust change process. So when bids come in, we would assess them for suitability around strategic fit. Are they doing the right homes, the right households, and the right measures? And as we found these different problems coming in with supply chain costs and planning controls, we've actually been getting LAs to do different changes to their project to say, oh, actually, we can't do all these heat pumps. So instead, we're going to do a lot of cavity wall, and then we're going to do some loft insulation with that cavity wall and make up the difference. But using that method to keep an eye on the strategic fit, because what we don't want to do is get to the end of the scheme and say, oh, all we've done is solar, and we haven't actually done any of the high value for money measures. So really controlling and keeping an eye on what's happening on the ground. And I think the last thing that's really important is finding EF and Gs. So we know there's loads of Ds and everyone can find Ds. There's high search costs for EF and Gs. So we have for phase 1, phase 1A and phase 1B, we've actually flexed the amount of band Ds that we've allowed to be included in schemes. Because what we don't want to happen is lots of money being spent on surveys that people thought were EF and Gs. They're turning out as Ds, and then that's wasted money. So we've kind of flexed the amount of band Ds we've allowed into the scheme to get as much delivery as possible. So I will definitely hold there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to stop, Kate. Thanks. Some incredibly detailed and some powerful lessons. If I could ask, we've had some questions for you. We're going to hold those for the discussion at the end. So thanks very much, Kate. Virtual round of applause, I'm sure, from 350 people on the call. Now, we, as I mentioned earlier, we were asked to organise this event really off the back of the blockages in the system that were coming to light. And we found ourselves talking mainly around issues around the insulation below ground, so below the DPC. There was guidance, I wouldn't say written by BEIS as much as clarifications on existing guidance that was published by BEIS last week. We at Retrofit Academy felt there was a need to go into slightly more detail with you technically minded folk. So Dr. Peter Rickaby has put together some technical guidance specifically around that insulating below DPC level. And we're going to go, Peter's going to go through that now. Peter, if you'd like to share your screen. The case studies we come on to then both refer to, all refer to insulating below ground. So we'll be able to start putting those sort of key learnings into more practical context there. So, but Peter, over to you.
Thank you, David. Actually, what I want to talk about just very briefly is this new technical guidance note 2101, which we've put together at the Retrofit Academy about the ground floor wall junction with EWI. And it's not just us. Actually, I've been working pretty closely for the last 2 weeks with BEIS and SWIGA and with Colin King to make sure that we get this guidance exactly right. And we actually finished this version that's now been posted on the COE website this morning. So it's completely, literally hot off the press. So that's what it's called. It doesn't, the one you'll get doesn't quite look like this because Andy Jackson's had it nicely designed. This is my PDF version of our original manuscript, but I'll just take you quickly through the content. The issue that we were presented with is that a lot of people find a great difficulty in digging down to take their wall insulation below the EWI down to 400 below DPC, which they think is what PAS 2035 requires. And obviously there are lots of places where that's very difficult and it's always expensive. The difficult places being when the house is on the back of the pavement, for example. So this was undoubtedly a blockage, but our perception was that this has really come about, or the issue has come about, because people are not understanding what the PAS actually asks for. So what this guide sets out to do is to explain that. So it sets out the PAS 2035 and PAS 2030 requirements, which are basically the same. And it says that it says in Annex D that you shall include construction details that eliminate thermal bypass and minimize thermal bridging at corners, junctions, edges, and edges of insulation layers. And it points in the respect of external wall insulation at the online best practice guidance, which was put together some time ago now by NIA, IAA, INCA, and SWIGA. And that was actually put together between the publication of PAS 2030, 2017, and the publication of the current two PASs. But it's still the best practice guidance. And what both PASs do is recommend the use of that guidance. And that's where the going down below DPC level and below ground comes from. So if you have a look at that guidance, what you find is actually there are two compliance options in those best practice details, and there is another one in the PASs. So what I should point out before we go into them is that in the SWIGA, INCA, NIA, IAA details, there are two grades of details, and they're graded with colored blobs, green and yellow. Green are the best practice details, which don't involve any thermal bridges or very minimal. And the yellows are a little bit less robust. They do have a little bit of thermal bridging, but they're still pretty good. And there were originally in these details a set of red details, which were full of thermal bridges, which Colin King and Hunter Danskin and I kind of combed out of them at the time of consultation. It was in fact a condition of the PASs pointing at them that the red details were removed. So the three options in the PASs are effectively these. Number one is use the green coded construction detail from the online best practice details. And that involves using waterproof insulation, it's usually XPS, below the bottom tray of the EWI. That's from dampproof course downwards, going to 400 millimeters below the internal floor level. And of course, that will involve excavation, backfilling, making good of the surface finishes, and so on. So that makes it a complicated process which involves trades which EWI installers don't necessarily have on their books, and more expense and more disruption. And sometimes it's just not possible. The second option is to use the yellow or amber coded construction details in the same set. And that involves using waterproof insulation, again, below the bottom tray of the EWI, but down only to ground level. And the only condition that the PASs put on that, or PAS 2035 puts on that, is that if you use the amber or yellow detail, then you accept an increase of 1 in the inherent technical risk of the EWI measure in the PAS 2035 Annex B risk assessment. Now, actually, if you go and look at that, you'll see that increasing the technical risk of the measure by 1 will not change the risk path through the path. It will most likely be path B anyway. And it's not going to push you into the next risk path. So the implications are very small. And in many cases, if you're using a industry quality assurance scheme, such as the SWIGA one, you're getting a reduction in the inherent technical risk of 1 as another concession offered by the PAS. So you end up where you started. And then the backstop, option 3 for this detail, is to calculate a thing called the temperature factor, which is a measure of the relative temperature of the inside of the detail, the inside surface, compared with the temperature of the surrounding room surfaces. And there's a process for doing that, which is in BRE's information paper 106. And that gives you a feel for how long it's been around, since 2006. And what it says in there, well, what PASs say is that you should calculate the temperature factor in accordance with the BRE IP 106 process and show that it's not less than 0.75. It has to be 0.75 or more. And that is deemed by BRE to be the critical temperature factor, below which there is a high risk of surface condensation and mold growth. Now, BRE has produced a couple of publications that show that actually you can get the temperature factor above 0.75 with insulation going down to the ground and not going underground. So there's plenty of options there. They've got some examples in those 2 papers on the screen now, FB61 and FB79, which show how you can do it. So that's another way around the problem of digging down. But the outcome of the calculation depends on the thickness, the materials you've used, thicknesses of the wall and the floor, the materials you've used, the level of insulation on the wall, and so on. So it is going to be quite often the case that we have to calculate the temperature factors. And this particular process has been not only published since 2006, but in the PASs since PAS 2030, 2017. So there's no excuse for a competent EWI installer or designer for not being able to calculate temperature factors. It's part of the job. It's part of the required competence. There is a complication then, which is that when you get a suspended ground floor with an externally ventilated cold void beneath it, then actually achieving a temperature factor more than 0.75 is almost impossible unless the floor is insulated at the same time as the wall. So the consequence of that is it's unlikely to be possible to comply with the 2 PASs unless you take a whole house approach and insulate both the wall and the floor at the same time. Now that's clearly another barrier. Very often the LADS caps that, for instance, Kate was talking about won't extend to funding both elements, even though that's what PAS 2035 is driving us to do, whole house retrofit and joined up at the corners, junctions and edges. So in the guidance, we've basically adopted the same approach that was used in the IWI guidance that some of you will have seen. If it's excuse me, if it's impractical to insulate the ground floor at the same time as installing the EWI, then you should be planning to insulate the floor as soon as possible afterwards. And it's not an ideal approach because in the interim period between the 2 installations, the uninsulated element, which will be the floor, will have a lower internal surface temperature than the insulated elements, the walls, and that increases the risk of surface condensation. So the mitigation for that risk in that interim period between the 2 elements being insulated is to ensure that the ground floor rooms are heated to at least 18 degrees during occupied periods, and the house should be ventilated by a continuous ventilation system, not an intermittent one. Now, this is a little bit weak because we can't guarantee that fuel-poor households will be able to heat the house to 18, and we can't guarantee that we'll continue to use the ventilation and won't switch it off. But we have said in the guidance that occupants should be advised of the critical importance of adequate heating and ventilation. And then there's a final point in the, and clearly what you would do is you would then put the second, the insulation of the second element, the floor, high up on your program of work, not necessarily into stage 2 of the medium-term improvement plan, because that might be years away. It should be as soon as possible, as it says in the guide. And then finally, if you're going to insulate the walls with EWI and not insulate the floor until you can afford to do so or until you're able to do so, then it is necessary to facilitate the later installation of the floor insulation. And the way to do that is to ensure that when the floor insulation is installed in the plane of the suspended floor, probably, or immediately above or below it, that there is going to be a good connection or overlap with the wall insulation. So that takes us back to compliance options 1 or 2 from the insulation industry best practice details. In other words, either take the EWI down below ground level or use option 2 and go down to just to ground level. That will create sufficient overlap of the space where the floor insulation will be in the future, and it will certainly have to be done as part of the net zero program in order that we get a compliant installation at the end of the day where the two elements are both insulated and the connection does not have a significant thermal bridge in it. So ideally, we're looking at overlapping the location of the future floor by 400 millimeters. So essentially, there are lots of options. And one of the things that we think has arisen, or one of the reasons we think that the confusion and some of the complaints that have been sent to BEIS has arisen, is that people haven't looked at all the options.
Right.
Possibly.
Okay. Just
no, we're not taking questions at the minute, I'm afraid. Thank you, Peter. Let's make a bit of progress now. Andy and Emily from my team, could you make sure a link's posted to where that document is available, please, in the chat? I think some people are struggling to find it.
Share.
Yeah. Now, Peter, just one quick question to you. We're going to have a much more informed discussion later on, but just for clarification, you're saying that guidance is approved by the Academy, by Trustmark, by BEIS, and by SWIGA. Is that correct?
Yes, except that it does make the point that if you do insulate the walls and not the floor, it is technically not compliant with past 2035 or past 2030. And so what's suggested as the workaround is technically not compliant. And I know that Phil at Trustmark will have something to say about that, but they're taking a view. We've offered it as a workaround. It's and it has been approved by SWIGA, by BEIS. I was talking to Ruth Richmond and Hunter Danskin only yesterday afternoon about it. And I think we're all happy that that's the way forward. And the final thing to say, which is slightly naughty of me to do, is that the forthcoming amendment to past 2035, which is not yet published, looks as though it's going to go in the same direction. It's going to soften the requirement to allow that kind of approach with improved heating and ventilation in the interim.
Okay, I think there was a yes at the start of that, though. So it has been agreed between those organisations with some bells and whistles. And if I could just introduce Andrew Champ from SWIGA, who I think I probably neglected to welcome at the start, so apologies, Andrew. There are questions in the chats that I know we've discussed at length over the last couple of weeks around whether there are guarantees available for insulation systems below ground. So perhaps you could just update us on the real situation there, please.
Okay, so the situation is that all the BBA certificates or key works, they don't have to be BBN anymore, all show the detail below ground and to ground, but they all also have a bracket around them saying it's out of scope, and that's pretty much across the board. The system holders are fully aware of this. BBA have offered to carry out the testing to take them below ground or to ground, but again, the issue there is it's likely to take 6 to 12 months worth of testing and cost somewhere in the region of £35,000 to £60,000 per system holder. So they're obviously not per system as well. So they're obviously not keen to do that. Now, the way SWIGA has worked and the industry has worked around what we call non-trads. So these are, this, I think BRE, if Colin's on the call, will know there's 260 odd of these available. And therefore, people can't produce certification every single one of these. So what we tend to do is we have a non-trad approach, and we are proposing to take certainly as a guarantee provider, a non-trad approach here. So we have met with all the system holders as early as this week, as was mentioned by Phil. This is Peter, I beg your pardon, that this is all very recent. So we've met with all the system holders, and they will all develop a detail, or they all have details, and they will all stand by those details, certainly to ground. And then because they do that, and the contractors will stand by installing them to ground, SWIGA and other guarantee providers, to be fair to them, will also then offer a guarantee. So it'll be a consistent guarantee approach. So they won't necessarily be certificated, but these details have been used in the new build market for some decades now, and certainly in the continent, they've in Germany and other Scandinavian countries, they've been used there consistently as well. So the approaches are well known, the risks are well known. And the thing that was missing previously was the fact that nobody would actually stand by their detail. So they would provide the detail, but they wouldn't guarantee it, which meant that the guarantee providers were left out on a limb. We've taken that discussion with them now, and certainly all will offer the solutions to ground. And I think if you're a contractor that has got a system where the system provider for some reason decides not to do that, there are many other system providers that will step in and fill that void. So I'm very confident that this won't be a problem moving forward.
Thank you very much. You'll all have the opportunity to ask further questions around that towards the end. There's a lot of questions in the chat, and we will try and come back to them. Now, what I'd like to do now is move on to our case studies. And I'm incredibly grateful to both Derek Horrocks and Alice Monty for stepping forward from their organizations with some real life examples of projects that they have, which they are finding problematic. It is really appreciated, the honesty with that. So we're going to take Derek's first one first. So Derek, if you'd like to unmute yourself, I will put your presentation on the screen. And then what the format of this first one is quite detailed. Derek has around 10 minutes here to talk us through where he's at with things. Then we're going to ask the panel to respond. They have all discussed these in advance, so not seeing them for the first time, and we had sort of agreed positions on them. So we'll feed back after that, and then we'll move on to Alice, then back to Derek, and then back to Alice for the final one. So Derek, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Yep, thank you.
Great stuff.
Thanks, David.
Okay, so this is your first case study.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, what I'm going to try and do is give some real life examples and some real life sort of context around what's actually happening out there. We work on a lot of LAD schemes, many LAD schemes, and we're working on some of the social housing decarbonisation fund demonstrator schemes, and some large schemes, and these are just portions of them schemes. So it's really what I'm trying to get across today is the impact, the transition from PAS 2030 17 to PAS 2030 19 and PAS 2035, and not necessarily the impact on us as a business, but more on the impact of our clients and obviously the tenants and the homeowners that our clients represent, and some of the impacts that, whether perceived or real problems on these schemes are happening. So the first scheme we're going to look at is an LED scheme. It's an LED 1B scheme. The deadline for funding is March 22. So some of this sort of came in and came over, sort of bridged PAS 2030 17 and PAS 2030 19. So it's 120 mixed tenure schemes. What's important to understand is there's lots of different archetypes in them schemes. And the information I'm going to give you at first is about the average sort of prices and issues around them schemes, not individuals. So there's each individual property is dealt with individually with its own, obviously, retrofit assessment, its own retrofit design, and that's what's important to understand. So we've averaged it out. So some costs may look high, some may be looking low, but it's on average. So we've done the 20 that we said we'd do before October, before the end of this month, which is already done. We would have hoped to have been well ahead now on PAS 2035 side of things, which is 50 social houses, 50 private houses in this particular element of the scheme. But it's been a little bit slower start than we would hope, due to one of the problems being procuring the retrofit professionals that of the, shall we say, experience and ready standard, particularly around the designers, ready standard to sort of take on some of the size and scope of some of the schemes. But also, obviously, as the scheme prices moved with the transition, the clients are like, whoa, hang on, stop. We need to know exactly what we're going to be paying and exactly what the difference is and why before we commit. Okay, sorry, David, can we just next
Sure.
one? So this is again average across these properties. So the under PAS 2030-17, on average across the properties would have been 13,000 per property on average, with given for the 100 still to be done a 1.3 million scheme. With the changes in PAS 2030-19, the impact is increasing these to £22,000 per property, or potentially increasing. We've already gone through some of the mitigations, which gives an overall scheme sort of extra over to our client at 900,000, which is obviously a huge issue for them. So basically, in general, per property, on average, retrofit assessment is about, and design and coordination, about £800. That varies quite significantly depending on complexity of design and property. The below at this stage, this is before the agreement and the clarification from Peter there, of course, and the hard work from everyone over the last couple of weeks, was to go below damp-proof course was around 4,500. Extension of roofs in lieu of verge trims, 3,200, and an additional lift of scaffolding for the roof works to extend the roofs was £500 on average. So every single property out of them 100 properties is priced individually. They've all got their own issues. They've all got different complexities, and then prices have been brought together over the 100 properties to give you them figures. So they're not just pie in the sky figures; they are actual figures. So having a look at the impact on this. So out of the 100 houses, the client, the mixed tenure houses, the client is prepared to pay the extra £9,000 a property out of his own capital budget to get the job done. Wouldn't say he's happy to do so, but he is. But unfortunately, the 50 private houses have all been taken out of the scheme. So obviously under the LAD scheme, the client, as we know, the client's got an average of £10,000 per property, at 13,000 on average, funded with other properties that we're doing, which were less than 13,000, they could bring it still in on the £10,000 per property cap overall. That's obviously not possible now with the 22,000, and they've had no choice but to take these properties out the scheme. And the unfortunate thing about this is, and I think Kate was talking about it before, is these are fuel poor, private, vulnerable households that are now facing another winter in cold, damp houses. And it's the people that need it most that are the people that are suffering, unfortunately. So clients' general feedback is they've gone back to BEIS, expressed their concerns over the increased costs. They're concerned with public perception because they engage these private residents in the region. They're expecting the work, and they feel they've got to go back to them now explaining they cannot move forward with the works, which is obviously not a great situation for everyone concerned. Thanks, David. Should we just?
Yeah, sure.
So this is just one of the property types in that scheme. It just highlights some of the issues that we've been talking about today and continue to talk about. So the insulation below DPC would have to be completely excluded because of the encroachment. Public highways would have to be shut, pavement closures and permits would have to be applied for, which is just not practical. As you can see on the property, insufficient roof overhang to all elevations, including the rear extension. We've been quoted 12 weeks for the roof tiles, which just completely throws it out. It's impossible in a timescale to do it. There's obviously party wall issues with both properties neighbouring, and that again, to get them sorted out would make it practically impossible to extend the roof line. You can see down the side there, concrete pathway for safe access. That's unfeasible to take that access out to dig below ground. And questions we've now had answered is that at present there's no external wall insulation system, DPC, that's BBA or BRA approved to go down below level. Point about gullies: if there's gully in close proximity, they'll have to be relocated. One of the big issues there, as you can see, is that large boundary wall that, you know, to avoid the coal bridging and do it properly, it would have to be knocked down, insulation done, and that wall rebuilt, which would obviously be a major cost and a major sort of disruption. And some comments there around BT and Openreach and their sort of issues. So that just brings it into a little bit of pictures and shows you a little bit about practical side of it. In that sort of property, so taking aside that's what that property would cost extra. So that's pretty much I think the same as we've discussed before. So we just come to, don't profess to go through these, because these are some of our solutions, and some of them are already solutions. So these solutions here of what have been worked up by industry, what they do reflect what are in the thermal bridging guide, and you know, Andrew and Dr. Jeremy Richards from my company have spent, and others have spent a long time sort of working these and putting them together. I think initially Colin King was involved and others. So there's no need to go through them. I think we're now clear where we are below ground, and that helps a lot with these properties and what the issue is. So there's no need, I don't think, to probably go through these. Meter boxes, what we're just saying really is that there is an option. Option one is they should be repositioned where it's all possible. The main problem with the repositioning is disruption time, getting the 6 to 8 weeks, 12 weeks now it's going out to get utilities out to move them, and it's more of a practical problem than cost, but there is a cost to it. We have under 2017, have for many years, got a detail that can go round, and what we're suggesting is that we continue with that detail and put meter boxes in the midterm plan, and obviously as they come to get replaced with other forms of low carbon heating, then the boxes taken out at that time. So that's just one sort of possible way around that, or way it can be done. And then coming on to verge trim details is slightly different. These are and again, sorry, this is where Dr. Jeremy Richards was more involved. Was putting some solutions together for robust verge trims, which are currently not allowed under the PAS. We've got some quite detailed, again, probably won't go through them, but options that we've put as an industry to BSI and to all involved really, to see if we can come up with solutions that are agreeable alongside a training program that is put in place that's quite robust for the fitting of these, that sort of gives a robust solution without the need for extending roof lines at every sort of juncture. And again, Peter might want to tell us a little bit more about where we're up to on that, but I believe there is a plan in place to maybe sort of road test these on some schemes, and see what they're make ourselves comfortable that, you know, they work in practice.
Should we explore that then, Derek? Now, is that probably quite a nice segue to receiving?
It's probably the next big. It's probably the next big. I would say money saver. That's not the right word to say, but there's the next big thing that we need to look at after now we've solved the below ground.
Yeah. Okay. As I said, we met on Wednesday and reviewed this very detailed case study you put together. So perhaps Peter or Andrew might be best placed to respond on this one. have my notes for the meeting too.
Well, shall I talk about the trims to start with? Just because, as Derek, you want to know where we are. Andrew and Jeremy brought the new improved trims. They're not just verge trims; they're eaves trims, as you can see on the screen at the moment, to the BSI Retrofit Standards Task Group on a couple of weeks ago, and that was, we like them. What the official position is that the PASs point at the insulation industry guides, and the insulation industry can change those guides at any time, however they want. So there's no restriction on that. However, what we did say from the Retrofit Standards Task Group was that we wouldn't be very keen to support just changing things on the basis of a design and some drawings. What we would like to see is some testing. And actually Hunter Danskin at BEIS confirmed the same thing, and so did Colin King subsequently. So what we're basically saying is we'd like to see some houses with these installed on. Maybe Derek can help us with that, so that we can run them through a few months of this winter and make sure they really don't leak. And what we're all concerned about, of course, is that when you do the things in reality, it's a bit different from what the design says, and quite how you fix it is sometimes different, and how you get at it and so on. And sometimes the joints aren't as good as you thought. So we want to make sure that these things really work in practice. And if they do, it will be great, because then they can be added to the best practice details, and without amending the PAS, they'll be allowed to, people will be allowed to use them. So I'm hoping that we can get these in place by the end of the winter, provided we get some good testing. And we've had some conversations about how many houses and for how long, and those kinds of things. There's also been talk of possibly using, Hunter Danskin suggested using the Salford test house as well to do some of the work. So we should have the new trims in place, I would say, early in the new year, provided Andrew can get them manufactured in sufficient quantity.
Right, so just very quickly, because the other thing that had to happen, as you know, Peter, is the offending line in B4 in PAS 2030, which actually refers to that trims of plastic and metal shouldn't be used. That was, we had the final meeting of PAS 2035 yesterday, and that was the working group allowed that to be changed to, rather than ban them, just to say that you should not use plastic or metal trims unless, and then it directs you back to the guide, which then, as Peter mentioned, allows the guide to be updated outside of the PAS close date, so we can get these things done. And Peter's right that we are talking with BEIS at the moment about how we manage sites, because of course under 19 you're not allowed to use verge trims, so therefore we need also a dispensation. So the idea is we will handpick sites from contractors, and the industry is really keen to do this on site rather than in a test house, because in a test house you could take a long time preparing and making sure it all works, when the reality is we want to see these things work in the field, with the reality of pressure, of time and weather and so on. So so we're working with BEIS now on how we could do this, and then we will put these back to the Retrofit Task Group. There'll be some monitoring of them, some evidence base, and then once we're all comfortable, they can go ahead. And in the meantime, in parallel, we're designing the details to go into the weathering guide at the same time, but also there's some work for the system holders. So they're looking, of course, at the details for their systems, because each system's different, and also building training for their contractors, because, you know, as Peter mentioned, this is a far more robust approach than what was there previously, and therefore training needs to go alongside that. So all of that's in place.
Right. Okay. So we're working towards a good solution on the verge trims, and as Peter says, in the near future, the next few months. So is there an argument with this question to the whole panel? Is there an argument for pausing this project whilst those issues are resolved? Because I think the cost savings, both with going below ground and the verge trims, is sort of £7,500 per property. I think we worked it out.
So I mean, I think we discussed in the group that you're going to have, if people, I think Kate mentioned it, if people know their stock, your local authority, you have different stock, and some of the stock where you don't have an issue with an overhang, they're the ones you would target now, because you can deal with the below ground cost and you don't need a verge trim, so there's no verge trim cost there. So in Derek's example there, where you have properties that don't need a verge trim but do need below ground, you remove the below ground cost, and therefore you're pretty much, other than some administration costs linked to the new PAS 2035 rules with designers and retrofit coordinators, not a lot of difference, to be frank. And then the idea is that should we get this straight, when we get this system's tested and through, and the PAS is released in January-ish, then of course you could bring the second lot of stock on where you do need verge trims, because then they can be removed. You know, the verge trims can be used as opposed to and then you're dealing with both the verge trim cost and the below ground cost. So, you know, for me, I think providing there are properties that have overhang as well, get on with those, and your additional costs are mitigated, really.
Understood, Andrew. But this is obviously a project that's been approved and there's funding available through LADS. So what was our guidance to Derek on this particular project?
I mean, I can probably answer that anyway, David.
Okay.
Obviously, going back a little bit to what Kate was saying before, you know, through the clients are working with BEIS, and BEIS are being flexible and being able to amend the products and use the funding in the best possible way, as long as it's done, you know, and that's what, you know, that's exactly what's happening. So we're working with our clients to identify, do the retrofit assessments on different houses and do a little bit of swapping and changing, and drop back on them when the proposals are in place.
Do I hear the sounds of a resolution, Derek? Are we? Yeah. We cracked this one. That's fantastic.
Well, I wouldn't say cracked it. Only on the people that were in them houses won't be very happy that were having their houses done, and now they're not. But yeah, I think the best possible solution is being put in place to sort of, you know, ensure that properties are retrofitted in the correct manner, and that obviously the most people are benefiting from the government money that's been available.
And I think just on the on those householders not getting the measures, I think for this is that they're not getting it right now. But let's not waste all that surveying, all that good work that's been done to get them ready, and we'll put them on the back burner until they can get through. But yeah, I'm glad you feel that we are being reasonable and trying to kind of allow different changes and measures.
Very much.
Okay,
one of the questions I'd like to ask, but it's the point for Derek. If you look at your extra costs, they're really in two categories. One is the extra cost of the details, whether they be the ground or the top, and we've talked about that. And the other is the extra cost of the process that comes with PAS 2035, the assessment, the improvement option evaluation, the medium-term plan, the evaluation at the end, etc. And actually, some of that stuff was in PAS 2030, 2017. At that time, you had to have a design, you had to have construction details and so on. So I'm not sure the comparison is actually apples and apples, it's apples and pears. And I think it'd be really useful to try and unpick those numbers, be helpful to all of us, if we're not now, obviously, but to see exactly what's coming from the improved process to improve quality, and what's actually not a fair comparison because you were doing it anyway, but you've put it in as 0 under 2030-17. So I'd just like to try and unpick that if we can.
I can start. That's quite an easy one to understand and to answer, because on schemes with social housing providers and local authority delivery clients, of course, that cost is the cost to us. But obviously, the cost to the client is still there. So the client under the 17, the client would be doing the design, the client would be appointing the architect, the design would still be done, the construction drawings would still be put in place. That wouldn't be our cost. Now that's our cost.
Okay, so the client is defraying that cost. And we've been doing lots of work with the LADS hubs where some of those functions, like the design, have been in a different place from the installer anyway. So
some are.
Yeah. So
and that would then become nil.
They're not new costs, they're just in a different place.
Yes.
Yeah.
Apart from the fact on, just to clarify, apart from the fact on, say, social housing decarbonisation fund scheme, where the client is putting lots of upfront cost in to design pre-tender, and then obviously when we go out and do the retrofit assessments, the retrofit coordinators instructed, and we do the retrofit assessments, the criteria is slightly different then of what they can do to the houses. So it has to be redesigned by the retrofit designer. So in some ways, I think there's something there where the client's paying two design costs when he doesn't need to. I think that's just something we should be looking at.
Yeah, well, we have been having conversations, as Kate will know, with BEIS about the fact that predetermining the measures as part of the application for the LADS funding or the social housing funding is actually not compliant with the PAS.
It's
And
not.
we've been talking
Let's
about
not get into
splitting
that.
it.
Let's
Well, I
not
think
get
it's
into that
important.
now. We have to move on. I'm sorry. We've got quite a lot still to get through. Thank you, Derek. We're coming back to you shortly. Alice, are you there?
Hello. Yes, I am.
Hi.
Hello.
So we're going to move on to your case study, which is just a few slides, but an interesting one. So over to you.
Okay, so I'm Alice Monty. I work for EQUANS, which used to be called NG. Still part of the NG group at the moment. I'm a retrofit coordinator for some of our social housing decarbonisation fund schemes. We're also working on kind of GLA retrofit accelerator schemes, and the company's working on various LAD schemes and stuff. We're doing lots of whole house, large scale retrofit schemes with all the government funding. So we've got 4 retrofit coordinators as part of our team. I also qualified as a retrofit assessor as well. So we're doing a lot of our retrofit coordination and retrofit assessments in-house. As I mentioned, we've got whole house retrofit. So by default, effectively, our schemes are all fall under risk path C. Interesting comment there about we're determining the measures before. I won't go into that either because of the funding requirements, but that's interesting. So the target for the scheme that I'm particularly looking at the moment here with the case study is 50 kilowatt hours per metre squared per year space heating time requirement, which, if you're unaware, effectively means the fabric efficiency of the property. So replacing the heating system or PV, for example, doesn't make a huge amount of difference, but it's about the fabric of the building. So the property that we're looking at is a semi-detached house. It's currently got cavity wall insulation, although boroscoping, thermal imaging, we're not happy with the cavity wall insulation at the moment. So as part of the works, we're extracting, moving the cavities and then refilling the cavities with beaded insulation. The other parts of the work that we're looking at doing, 190 mil of external wall insulation, mineral wall insulation, 400 mil of loft insulation, new windows and doors, high performance double glazing, and insulated doors, and also solar PV and air source heat pumps, which is just our client's spec, so not part of the funding requirement. But obviously, as we're doing all part of the whole house retrofit together, all measures falling under PAS 2030 installations and MCS installations for the air source heat pump, solar PV. As I mentioned, there is going to be a risk path C. So we've got an architect on board as our retrofit designer who's effectively doing our drawings. We are doing a lot of the thermal calculations in-house as a retrofit coordinator, as we're SAP assessors and have had therm training and so on. So we've been doing a lot of that. If you want to go on to the next slide. So our issue, this is our building as it is existing. The extension on the side there is a 1-story extension, and it's not heated space at all. So there is also that wall there that's being pointed on is that we've got boundary issue. So we although it might be easier to insulate the whole way around to the building envelope, even effectively making it within the building envelope, the thermal envelope of the building, we've got boundary issues that we can't do that. So we're trying to insulate our heated space, so our main property. And yeah, if you want to go on to the next bit, you can see that this is our current issue that we've got. We've got doors really close to the wall on from the extension. And you can see it's kind of messing up our continuation of insulation. So we've tried to design around a chamfering detail. A lot of properties on our scheme have some kind of something around doors and windows that we're going to have to look at chamfering as a kind of solution for it. It doesn't look pretty. We know it doesn't look pretty, although these things don't look as bad as they do in plan. In real life, I'm aware, and I have seen some sites that the chamfering actually does look quite nice. But one of the key concerns that we're worried about is this and other chamfering details is we understand that for thermal bridging, we need to get that surface temperature count above 0.75. And what happens in the cases where, you know, we've tried to, you can see here, we've tried to minimize thermal bridging as much as possible. But there are scenarios where you can see here that the insulation drops off to nothing because of the door, and maintaining that door. We have to maintain certain widths of doors as well, social housing. And yeah, so just wanted to hear some commentary around what the panel have to say. I know we've got some answers back, which is great, but yeah, some feedback of these kind of issues.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks, Alice. So I'd invite anyone from the panel to speak up. We had some interesting ideas around this one, but who'd like to come in?
So I thought I'd just make a general point to start with, which is that doors in internal corners are really, really common in the housing stock. Nearly every terraced house with an outshot at the back, which usually has the kitchen in it, has got that problem. So we do need some generic solutions for them. And in many cases, the generic solution is often to put some insulation on the inside. It's a little bit of IWI to bridge the gap. But your example, Alice, is a very good one because it shows that that would be in the way of the kitchen. So it's very difficult. What we did talk about the other day when we looked at these is that, you know, why don't you just reverse the swing of the doors? Which would not...
It was, sorry, that was actually, sorry, Peter.
I was going to say...
as an option. That was discussed as an option with our architect before. There was a reason, I can't remember what the reason was, but I think that might not be a solution, but I will definitely, I'm going to be feeding that back to make sure. I have shared this with our architect already. Do we not still have some of the same issue in that?
Still have some chamfering to do, and that little bit of thermal bridge at top left would still be there within the thickness of the door, but you would have much less chamfering because the amount of the fouling of the door swing with the EWI would be much reduced. So I think it would be something to look at, and we do need to figure out some good solutions to that because they're all over the place. Doors in internal corners, all over the place. I mean, I think also when we looked at it the other day, our immediate reaction was, why don't you just insulate the outhouse? You dealt with that and you said, well, we can't take the EWI around the outside because of the boundary condition. Or maybe the outhouse gets some IWI. That might be another way to do it. And what we have done recently is we made it clear in a discussion with Trustmark that where the requirement is to insulate the whole of the house with wall insulation, that doesn't have to all be EWI or all be IWI. It can be a combination of the two on appropriate walls. And Trustmark will accept that as a way of achieving the 100% solution. So again, I think it's about being a bit flexible and imaginative about how we can deal with this. And if you can solve this door problem, Alice, I want to hear about it because there's loads and loads of other people doing the same thing.
Thank you, Peter. Colin, conscious you didn't make it, but you got any thoughts here?
Yeah, it's not often I come into meetings and don't talk, but yeah, it's to my mind, there's a couple of issues really going on. One is actually the building's being really over optimized by the sort of target U value with cavity wall insulation and that amount of loft insulation. So any thermal bridge actually becomes magnified because of the temperature difference in those corners. To make that stack up with a calculated temperature factor would be almost impossible. It's difficult when you've actually got a target of 50 kilowatt hours as an energy demand, and it's part of the drive towards this really driving down energy demand inside a building. But what I would suggest in that sort of situation is why use the same insulation? Why not use strategically placed higher performing insulation? You've got a semi heat loss area because it's sheltered. It's not an external wall. So when you actually look at the thermal bridging, you're not actually calculating the difference between an outside area and an inside area when you actually do those temperature factor calculations, because it's a sheltered space. So the U value isn't as bad. So there's no need to push that area of the building quite so hard. All you've got to do is look at that one junction, and I'd be looking at doing something with a different material to actually improve that one corner if you can't move the door or ring hang it. In my mind, if you shifted the wall, if you shifted the door 100 mil over, you could just put the insulation on the wall. It's that cost balance between how much knocking about can you do, but it's not an external wall. It's a sheltered wall, and I'd look at doing some different material in that one corner to get that detail to work properly.
Yeah, actually, so just quickly, I'd actually take it to the end, because the way the systems work, You know, you need to make sure you've got a clean line there. And if you, because was it 190 mineral wool you're using? So there's a lambda value of, I don't know, 38, 39. And then you don't have to go to aerogel. There are other products like PU and PI, providing this isn't a block of flats and you've got no issues with combustible materials.
We do have a client requirement that we don't use. For example, we wouldn't be using mineral necessarily on the whole with the thickness. The 190 mil thickness is obviously causing us issues all over the place with thermal bridging, but it is actually a client requirement that we aren't to be using polystyrene even on the buildings at all.
I think
I imagine they might feel similarly with PU.
Perhaps, or phenolic, or you know, because the lambda values of those are around 1922, so you get quite a saving in terms of space for a localized area, as Colin's mentioned there.
Yeah, and
when you look at the section of it, you probably only need about 50 mil of a better performing material to actually reduce that impact in that corner anyway. I think you could do it with 30 mil actually, if you use aerogel, or even less. Yeah, it's just the cost of the aerogel always frightens me.
I was going to say 30 mil of aerogel across 4.8 meters.
Times how many houses? Yeah, this is why I suggested one of the others. So
okay, brilliant. Okay, so some options at least there, Alice. Thank you very much for that. We'll come back to you shortly. So let's look at Derek's second case study. Over to you, Derek.
Yeah, again, it's just like, yeah, sorry, David, it's just slightly different. It's more of the same, just slightly different house types and slightly different, it's different clients and different sort of way of viewing things. But again, in this instance, there's 160 houses under LED 1B and 2. This is slightly different in this case because it's all social housing. So 80 houses have already been done under LED 1B and under 2017, and now under 2019 we're looking at doing 80 houses, all social housing again, but all different archetypes. Same thing. We'd like to have been halfway down through this project by now, using past 2030, 2019, 2035, but it's just been taking time to get the right retrofit professionals in place, which we have, and getting the correct designs in place and all the rest of it. But the client again is worried about obviously the extra costs. So yeah, thanks, David.
Okay.
So again, in this case, it's put in on these houses for under 2030-19. It's put in an extra cost of about 6,200 per property on average. And that's a cost increase of about £500,000 to the client over the scheme. Same sort of issues, slightly different figures, but same sort of issues. Obviously, the different averages for different properties. And but in this instance, even though they're all social housing, the client has taken out 30 properties from the scheme. So instead of treating 80 properties, he's now treating 50 properties. Is concerned about program delivery due to impact of extending the roof lines, which it makes the program a lot longer. Unfortunately, half of his properties have already undergone new roof replacements, so he can't stomach, or they can't stomach, now go and change into extending all the gables and the roofs when they just put brand new roofs on. So they're not happy there. And the roof tile manufacturer has confirmed that 10 to 12 weeks lead time, which is impacting on the program. So the client in this case, the feedback we've had in this case is, and this is something we're coming across an awful lot of. So our company has delivered, in this instance, 400 EWI installations, the housing stock over the last 5 years, to at least the quality of post 2030, 2017. And the client's never incurred one issue on one property. So the rights and wrongs of, you know, sort of what you're getting for the step up in standard to 2019, what the client's saying is, well, hang on, I've never had a problem with your installations in the past. They're well designed, good products used, well installed. So why do I need to pay an extra £6,200 per property? Can't I just have what I did have? And well, yes, you can, but you don't get the government funding if you do that. And not necessarily this client, but some clients are now starting to say, well, actually, it's actually cheaper to do it without the government funding, and let's do it under not under PAS 2017, but to that standard that you've always given me. Now, this is something that I just think if we start going down that route, we've all failed, because we want the right standard across all the housing stock and all the schemes to move forward. So it's making sure that we can deliver the 2030 19 standards and 20 to 2035 guidance within the costs that we've got, and make sure the quality improves. And that's what these conversations are all about. But in this instance, anyway, the client's lost 30 houses. Of course, as a business, we don't lose anything because we're still spending the same amount of money. We're just doing less. There's just less houses getting treated for it. Okay, so next one, please, David. Yeah, so again, we're just going down an individual archetype. We'll come on to what it looks like. In this instance, the increase is £7,000, just by making some of the adjustments that we've made by going 2 grand instead of below, using one of these robust veg trim detail and moving the meter box into the medium-term plan is saving £4,000 of that £7,000. So it makes a big difference. Okay, next ones. So this is just one of the archetypes, and just again, I always find it's useful if we can have a look at a picture. It just shows what we're sort of talking about. So the residents obviously can't be decanted, so internal is going to be quite difficult because it's quite small properties. You can see there's insufficient overhang to protect any external wall insulation system, and again, the roof tile procurement is around 12 weeks. Again, a concrete pathway for safe passage and access would have to be broken out to insulate below ground level. Any excavation undertaken is required prior to scaffold erection to avoid compromising scaffold stability. And again, we've talked about the guarantee situation. Gullies we've talked about, again, would need to be relocated. Meter box, again, we've talked about that same sort of an open reach. And you can see in one of these, there's also a disabled access ramp, which makes, obviously makes added complications to the retrofit design that would have to be thought about. So yeah,
thanks very much.
And really, it's just another example of it, another example of the cost. I think what's important, and that's what impacts the clients, is there's some big costs involved, and it sort of frightens them. And I think as what cost of a good retrofit develops, I think clients will get more used to what that cost looks like, and obviously they won't be expecting. They'll be expecting to do less houses, but do them to a higher standard, and that's got to develop over time.
Well, yeah, that's a really good point. There was a conversation in the panel the other day around what the expectation was around increasing costs as a result of changing the way we're doing things. So Phil Mason, you've been unusually quiet so far. I don't know if you're able to update us on that, or anyone else from the panel.
Yeah, right. Sorry, I was a bit short. Can you just clarify the question a little bit before we get right, please? Yeah,
we had a conversation. Well, look, if you don't feel you're the right person to answer it, anyone else on the panel can. But it was that we talked about the expectation of prices increasing as a result of doing things differently. You could look at it in terms of comparing delivery under PAS 2017 or PAS 2019 as one, but it's just this change, a step change in quality that we're talking about, and the overall expectation of increased cost.
So perhaps more from a Trustmark perspective than a personal perspective, I think that's exactly the direction that we see things going, in terms of more retrofit to a different standard per dwelling, rather than the number of dwellings that are improved. Because one of the things going forward is, I think it's about taking dwellings to the levels that can possibly be taken them to in one go, rather than repeat visits to the dwellings over a number of years.
Yeah. Okay.
So sorry, David, can I
Yes,
just sort of, yeah, it's just really about the EWI market. I've probably looked at more of this stuff over the last 20 years of my life than probably anyone else. The problem is there's never been enough money in doing EWI properly. If you look at the funding that's been available via ECO and all the other things, it was part of the report that I did for government when I was at the BRE. And it worked out that it was about 75% of the right level of funding was available via ECO. But the trouble was the industry has always done the work for the price that ECO dictated, and it's not the cost of doing the job properly. Now what we've got is an increased requirement to actually do it properly, and that's not been reflected in the cost that's actually available via ECO and other things, because they're still trading with the same carbon savings and stuff like that. But the two cases of Derek's in my mind really is, if you look at the guidance that I actually wrote in FB 61 and FB 79, if your building is a 9 or 12 inch brick solid building with out of clay bricks and a solid floor, to meet that temperature factor, there is no requirement to go below ground. You know, we showed that if you follow that with the right material and the right lambda value of the material, you can get within 25 millimeters of the ground finished floor level externally and still reach that internal temperature factor of greater than 0.75. So it is one of the three routes, but the proviso is that the floor must be solid. It must be a 9 or 12 inch clay solid brick wall, and then that requirement is actually met. Yeah, in the ideal world, it would be great if we could go down below level, but we've already got not enough money to do EWI. If we start then digging up external paths and finding out all sorts of other things, it makes the jobs unviable, and that will never actually begin to address the problems of improving our building stock. And sometimes when you get incentives out there to drive down the energy demand, they don't look at the risk of the age of the building and the complexity of dealing with these older breathable buildings. Yeah. So there is no one fits all situation. You've got to look at them individually. And what we have to remember is that PAS 2035 come about to protect the client, that PAS 2035 came out to actually make standards better. And it's no point complaining when those standards get better, because they're hard. They're meant to be hard because we're meant to do it properly. Most of the stuff I looked at hadn't been done 18 months and had failed straight away, a la Preston, a la Hull, a la just about every single city and town that I went to. So we have to do it better, but it has to be funded correctly at the same time.
Yeah, I don't think anyone disagrees with that. Thank you very much, Colin. Peter, you have your hand up. Final comment on this, then we'll move on.
Yeah, actually, it was a slightly different question, but for Derek, I agree completely with what Colin said. What I kind of saw into what you said, Derek, was that the client has put all the PAS 2035 functions with the contractor. And actually, the work we've been doing with the lads, the energy hubs, has suggested that some of those PAS 2035 functions should be on the client side of the fence. The retrofit coordinator, probably the assessment and so on, and that the kind of enthusiasm for local authority clients to package everything up and put it out to a sort of super design and build, assess, coordinate and everything else contract is probably not the right way to do it. And as you said earlier, they were probably doing some of that work in-house beforehand. They do have some of that expertise in hand. They just need to adapt their processes in a slightly different way. And with the Northwest Hub, we produced a whole series of models of how to do it. And the one that we did not recommend was to put all the PAS 2035 functions on the contractor side of the fence. So it's just, I think we can organize ourselves better as well in order to make it easier to do these things. And then I think you'd find that they would discover that some of the cost differential isn't there because they were actually doing some of those things beforehand themselves under 2017, and now they've dumped it into your contract, and not surprisingly, the costs come out too high or higher.
Thank you very much. Andy and Emily, could you pop a link to that PAS compliant retrofit document that Peter's referring to in the chat, please? Great. Let's move
Sorry,
on to
David. Can I just come back as Peter did
Yes,
ask
of course,
a question
yeah.
direct to me? Yeah, I think 100% right, Peter, in terms of the fact that there are different ways of doing it. And I think it's different for each client, is different how they want to go about it. And each client's experience is different in the capabilities of the people they're working with and how much they want to put into their the package and what's there. And we have clients that do all, you know, the guidance you referred to there, the Retrofit Academy, we have clients that do it all three ways. We're quite happy to work in any of the three ways, and we just offer the portfolio of however they want to work. We'll work with them.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks ever so much. So Alice, finally, and I'm going to politely ask if we can keep this just as brief as you did the first time there.
No problem. Just before that, I just wanted to echo that we would have hoped to be really much further along with our projects as well, just as Derek has said, but it's the design stuff has taken time, the contract, you know, programming stuff, resourcing, sourcing products and everything has taken way too long, and it looks like it's going to be a big problem. And just to echo the fact that the time frames for these schemes, for funding schemes, we think is far too restrictive at the moment. But yeah, just want to say that. Right, so final case study, it's the same project. It's an end terrace bungalow in this instance, so similar package of measures going in. If you want to go to the next slide, so the detail. So our issue is we've got an existing concrete lintel there. I don't know if you can hover over it. I can't. So you can see where it says existing concrete there. What we're finding is the surface temperature factor when modelled in is 0.74, which, as we know, is just below the 0.75 allowable tolerance for surface temperature factors at the coldest point there. And we've obviously, so we are a design here, we've tried to include some XPS here as the smallest amount we kind of permissibly could have. And yeah, I just wanted to see what you guys said as a potential solution, obviously trying to minimize costs. And I'm trying to go back to our client and obviously our operations teams and say, they're looking at me saying, well, you're 0.74. Well, surely that's okay, because adding a load of cost on to put something completely different there. Yeah.
Now, in fairness to the panel, Alice, this is my fault, not your fault. I presented this to them when it said that the temperature factor was 0.76, not 0.74. So we had a totally different conversation than the one we need to have. You did email me in between and tell me there was a typo in it. So, but the point remains, it's really, the key question is there any tolerance or should there be any tolerance from Trustmark or audit or anyone else where you're within sort of 0.1 or 0.0.1 of that acceptable level, which we did discuss at length in the panel. So we welcome anyone from the panel to respond.
Two things.
Sorry, Peter. Can I just take that one on the variation?
Do the number. Yeah, do the number.
Yeah, no, there is no fluctuation. A fail is a fail, whether it's by 0.01 or not. That 0.75 is an absolute calculation using the international standard. So no.
Okay, and that was the conclusion of the panel as well, which Colin wasn't at. So we're all in agreement. So what should we do about that detail?
That seems to me to be an exactly. It's an absolutely perfect example of where you use an aerogel. Those expensive high-performance insulations are for use where thinness is at a premium. So that's where you use them. So window reveals and underneath a lintel like that is where you would put your aerogel. And you know, you're using very small amounts of it, and trying to take a lesser performing material around there and just missing the temperature factor immediately says to me, find a slightly better performing material. You wouldn't need very much. And in fact, probably with aerogel, you get it thinner.
But I don't think you need, I think there is a risk we keep seeing aerogel, but there are other things in between that, as we discussed on the other one, where, you know, if you're that close, and that's XPS, which again is pretty poor thermally as a foam, you know, some of the more common foams that are readily available for significantly less money than aerogel would probably get you close to doing that anyway, I think.
No, I don't. I'm sorry, Andrew, I don't agree with you there. It's actually the enhanced lambda of the aerogel that gives you that benefit in those very small strategic areas.
You don't think phenolic could do it?
Yeah, I've looked at phenolic, and it doesn't become very stable when you actually get down to very thin thicknesses. It's very much a case of it can off gas and it can cause you all sorts. It's okay if it was encased in something, but when you've only got a very small area like that, it's crying out for aerogel. Use it strategically in very tight spaces. It's the only stuff to use.
Yeah, and there are lots of other examples of things like that. There's the window reveals, there's underneath sills, there's besides stairwells where you can't make the stairs thinner. There are lots of places where thinness is at a premium, and that's when you turn to the higher performing, albeit more expensive material.
Yeah, and you'd probably only use about 10 or 12 mil of it, and that would be it.
Yeah.
And you don't have horrible details there. That's where it was designed for, in my mind, in houses. Okay,
Alice, what's your response to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, the answer to a lot of these things is just aerogel, isn't it? I think we're finding more and more. I guess it's just, I'm not really involved in the costings of our staff and that kind of thing, but well, to some extent, but where we've got like repeatable, this kind of thing occurring quite a lot. Obviously here it's the lintels. This is quite a small thing, but it's essentially all these kind of details where we're literally just off that surface temperature factor. It's just, I guess for me, more than saying I'm trying to get out of it, I'm just looking for backup from you guys, the community or whatever, to say, actually, we do need to spend that extra, whatever it is, on these details to get there. Because for me, it's quite difficult to justify it when I'm saying it's just,
The other thing I would say, Alice, is if the windows are being remade or new windows being put in, why couldn't you just profile that section so it's bigger, so you can actually put a cheaper insulation in and look at that as a way of setting it off?
There's there's been lots of discussion on lots of these elements. We're trying to basically planning is very strict on these, so we can't really change sizing and any kind of external.
If they're not new windows, maybe you could have reprofiled the box section so it was bigger, which would allow a cheaper insulation to actually go in there rather than having the windows as they are made and then making them for the same size of the hole with the same window profile and then introducing aerogel. If you reprofile the window, make the section bigger, then you can use a lower cost insulation.
Okay.
I'm sorry, guys.
I mean, these sorts of challenges we're going to come up against all the time, whether you're a client or a designer or a contractor or a retrofit coordinator. And I suppose we're going to move on to a sort of a discussion now for the next 20, 25 minutes. But my sort of first question to the panel is, how on earth can we make this easier for everyone on this call who's going to get involved in these conversations? What do we need to do to make this easier for people to make the right decisions?
I didn't understand the question, David.
What do we need to do? What would need to happen to make it easier for everyone on call to make the right decisions without the answer being every time we need to speak to Colin, Peter, or one of the other small number of people with all the knowledge? That's
just about the industry gaining experience. And whenever you get new standards and they present new challenges, people find their way around it. And actually, one thing the building industry is very good at is finding solutions to problems introduced by new standards, whether it be building regs or PASs or whatever. They're very good at it. So I would say it's just experience. We're at the point now where we're doing stuff in a new way, almost for the first time, and inevitably people are going to say, that's a bit difficult. I haven't thought about that. Haven't quite got, the normal product doesn't work there. The normal process doesn't work there. And we're finding out how to do it. It's like Andrew reacting to the verge trims problem by designing a better verge trim. It's this, that's what's going to happen. We've spent the last 10 years in retrofit trying to use new build materials, products and processes in retrofit, but we're slowly introducing things that are retrofit specific. And that's as a result of experiencing trying to do it properly. So I think it will happen, but it's just a case of having events like this to disseminate the lessons.
So it's Andrew here. I agree. I think the other thing that we've recognised is the standards have all been rewritten. So the training has all been rewritten. So all the nods has been rewritten for EWI, for all the practical trades. And there's actually an interface module now being developed. So the training was behind the times as well. So the people we're now bringing through will also be trained on interfaces specifically. and coal bridging.
So we're doing all the right things already. We don't need to do any more. Just keep doing it. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I think we have to keep running forward, you know, meet the challenges and think creatively and imaginatively about solutions at the level of the stuff that Alice has shown us, and at the level of the stuff that Derek's shown us, and at the level of processes. But what we don't want to do is retreat from it and say, okay, we're going to accept a decline in quality because we think it's too difficult, because that's just going backwards.
Okay, that's fine.
David, can I just?
Yes, of course.
I think what's happened in the last few weeks has been quite astounding, actually, by bringing together, we've all been instrumental in it, by bringing together industry, BEIS, obviously the guarantee agencies, the associations, Colin, Peter, BSI, Trustmark, Retrofit Academy, and everyone together that has formed these solutions and got everyone on the same, and that sort of little bit of, not us and them, but lack of trust has been broken down. And actually everyone's worked to the same goal. And I think if we can continue to do that and then disseminate it through all the organizations, including, you know, doing lots of different events like this, like in the associations, like, you know, within Trustmark and SWIGA and etc., NIA. And I think this combined collaborative approach, we've achieved so much in 2 or 3 weeks. It's been quite incredible. And it's
loving the positivity.
Yeah, I think that's we've got to just continue to do that. I think that's what's really important.
Okay, that's great.
I'd just like to second that, Derek, because I think that's very clearly stated and very well said. And I think we're all on board with it. It's been really important. It's been a very valuable exercise.
Yeah. Okay. There were a few questions submitted in advance. Now, I'm not going to necessarily put all of these to you, so certainly that first one I think has been answered. No, I'm going to skip through that, so I think there's some good questions in the chat as well. Just a quick one I think we can answer here around whose responsibility it is to do these surface temp factor calculations. I think that's probably best answered by Peter.
So it's the retrofit designer's job to make sure that they're in place. They don't necessarily have to do them themselves. They might get somebody else to do the calcs or a woofy modeler to do it. And if the specialists, if the retrofit designer is coordinating a specialist EWI design from an EWI supplier, then the supplier and they're providing the details, then they should be doing the calcs too. I mean, my view at the moment is that the competency of anyone professing to be a specialist designer of EWI should include doing those calcs.
Okay, fantastic. That's nice and clear. Service and meter boxes, I think we've covered.
On that one, just one thing. Just this very morning, I've been shown an overbox, an insulated overbox, which goes over the meter. And the idea is that it changes the insulated envelope to outside the meter. But it was a brilliant product, so I've sent them off to talk to Andrew about it.
Oh, interesting.
That might be an innovative product that will help with that problem.
Sorry, what was her name?
I can't remember the name of the people, but it was called an overbox. They've invented.
And I did the temperature factor calculations for them, so it works.
Great.
Okay, interesting. Andy Merrin in the chat, practical as he always is, asked if we have an online forum where these types of problems and questions could be posted to gain advice from other experts. So we don't quite. Andy Johnson, our Centre of Excellence manager, has been raised that idea many times, and I think it's something we definitely want to do. It's a disappointingly expensive thing to do in this day and age, but I think it's something we must do. So we will put that in place. Okay, so look, there have been more comments in this chat than any meeting I think I've ever been in the last 2 years. So we'll flick through there and pull out some really good questions. But is there anyone who would like to come in and ask their question verbally to the panel? Perhaps you could just put your hand up so I'd know, and then I'll bring you in. I don't all go shy on me now.
Well, I got one.
I'm not sure who that is, but go ahead. Jason.
Jason.
Hi. So my question would be on this call. We're not actually system designers. None of us are. Why are there no system designers on this call to try and come up with solutions?
There may well be.
Such as CNAF, Insta, and all the other related people.
There may well be. I'm not sure who is on the call.
Okay.
We've got 350. I can't say if there are or aren't. Is there anyone from the product sector there who wants to respond?
Just quickly, so it's Andrew. So I deal with the people on the product side. They're pretty much members of ours. In case if nobody sticks their hand up. I know that so people like Insta and others, Permarock, which Derek owns, are all looking at these things in detail. So they already have plinth details. They already have verge trim details. They already have details for removing basic cold bridging. So things like timber blocks where you fix downpipes. So all of these are already available. Things for robustly fitting, the most common things like sky dishes, although Sky is now moving away from sky dishes, but all those sorts of things are already available. I think the issue is, back to Peter's point, they value engineer them out, because we're trying to save money. But they are already available. Each of the system holders have them. It's just getting them used. And part of the PAS process and sitting on the PAS working group is to move the PAS to require these things to be used, which is why cold bridging is now a mandatory requirement.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Julian Williams had a question.
Yeah, I wasn't going to ask it after all, but I am. I insist as an RC to be visiting site once a week at least, because I think that's PAS 2035 compliant. Correct me if I'm wrong. There are lots of jobs which are going ahead without weekly visits by the RCs. Why, and when's it going to stop?
Okay, that's a PAS process question, I think. Anyone wants to comment?
I'll only say that I agree with Julian. I think it is part of the job. Well, it very clearly states in the PAS that the work on site is done under the oversight of the retrofit coordinator, and not going there could not possibly be compliant. So sticking your retrofit coordinator in a back room at a desk and saying that's where you work, mate, is not running the PAS process.
I'll just chip in with that if I can. I wonder just whether there's something through the development of the lodgement process that actually records more about the quality strategy of the project and the visits involved, because I think these things are done on risk basis when people know their supply chains and they have a risk understanding of how work's delivered, not only by the people in the organizations doing it, but the type of work that's involved with it. I think that needs to be taken into account, but I would absolutely agree, and it's something for our retrofit coordinator schemes to be very involved with as well. It isn't acceptable for retrofit coordinators to simply sit in a back room and just be signing things off completely remotely on every single occasion. It just can't be it can't be right, and it doesn't meet the PAS. Because how do you know what's going on in your project? If I were in that situation, I wouldn't be content to do it, because I'd need to know what it is that I'm lodging into the data warehouse, and I need to understand that the quality of it is right as well.
So that is happening, Phil, I think, isn't it?
Oh, say that again, David, sorry.
Is that happening? Or do we have retrofit coordinators never visiting site and signing stuff?
I think what's starting to happen is there are organisations that are potentially beyond the reach of Trustmark that are gathering panels of retrofit coordinators that are within the reach of Trustmark. And in order to be able to reduce the cost and the speed of things, that they're bringing panels of RCs together and tempting them into working in that fashion. And we've had evidence of it, and we've dealt with some of those issues. There will be more that when you audit, by the very nature of audit, you don't audit 100% of everything that happens, but we're starting to track trends around it. So the message is, if there's people here that are in those types of environments, we know where it is and we can track some of it, and we'll deal with it when we find it.
Okay,
evidence-based.
Back to the hen retrofit coordinators. I'm going to come to Alex Hunt and then Andrew Cunningham. I can see you waving, Andrew. There's a comment in the chat from, says Warmer's iPad, so I don't know who that is, but is asked for ventilation guidance next session and quickly. We have a monthly PAS club where you can ask any question about, and lots of those at that. So if you're a Centre of Excellence member, last Friday of every month is PAS Club, and we really get into the detail of that with many of the same people who are on our panel today. There's also a ventilation guide on the website, which Peter wrote, and there are no answers you'll need on ventilation that aren't covered by that guide. I can assure you, so it is available now. So, Mr. Hunt, lovely to see you. What would you like to ask?
Well, my only point was really as well was that, you know, I've been marking other people's retrofit coordinator coursework to become an RC, and I know personally of several of them that are being paid 195 quid to do the retrofit coordinator's job, and I just don't understand how that is possible to do. And I think that needs to be looked at quite carefully by the people that, like Trustmark, who are you know, managing these processes. And in the meantime as well, I was just going to say, David, if you're worried about getting a forum and how much it costs, follow the Federation of Master Builders cheapskate way of doing it and do it on the Facebook members group, which I thought was brilliant. You know, it's all there, the platform's there, use it. So
Alex, yeah, you're right. We set up a retrofit coordinator LinkedIn group about 7 years ago and continue to manage it, and it's never used. And we also have a Facebook members group, never used. So I wish it were that simple. But we clearly need some sort of solution. Andy's been badgering me all year to do something about this, so we'll just find a solution and do it.
Just an aside, and not to push it, because this is not about flogging guarantees, but we are launching an online platform for our site, and there will be a members area open to non-contractors and system holders, specifically for EWI. So if you've got questions, there's a lot of stuff on certification there. It's all free. We don't sell you details or anything else. We're an industry body, and our whole purpose is to make sure things get done right. So it's that will be available for November as well, to support specifically on EWI.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Andrew Cunningham.
Hi. Yeah, I just wonder, is there going to be a shift also to heating? Because I noticed in the training, retrofit coordinator training, there was quite a lot of focus on the idea that heating should be quick and powerful, and of course it's changing now in terms of heat pumps. So I was just wondering, is there going to be a slight shift in the way a retrofit coordinator is trained, in the way they view heating? And the other thing I thought, I don't know if Kate Duffy is still on this, but people that follow the heating systems are saying that a huge proportion of condensing boilers aren't condensing, and there's a 10% efficiency available in 70% of the homes with condensing boilers which aren't condensing. I'm just wondering, should that be more part, a bigger part of what we're doing? Because I'm going to houses and we're talking insulation bits and pieces, and then the gas boiler is sitting there inefficient, not condensing, wasting 10% gas year on, year out for the next 15 years. If you multiply that by 70% of the homes in the country doing that, there's a massive loss there. And I just wondered, maybe it should be more part of what we do, or we should have more greater awareness of this.
Yeah, okay, fine. I'll just answer your question about the coordinator training. We're doing a complete rewrite to the building services content, really because the world's moved on, as you say. And those of you who've done the course or on the course will always have access to that. And we'll let you know when the module's published, the new module's published. And then, Peter, are you well placed to respond on the condensing boiler question?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a slight misunderstanding in the question, because actually the majority of the efficiency saving on a condensing boiler doesn't come from the condensing mode. That's the last bit. It comes from the fact that it's got two heat exchangers, one of it which extracts heat from the flue gases. So condensing boilers don't condense all the time, and actually if they don't condense all the time, it doesn't matter that much. And kind of my final point on that would be, we're getting rid of them in 15 years anyway, so anybody replacing a boiler now ought to be thinking heat pump.
That's what's in the system.
Okay. I mean, the leading heating engineer lobby disagrees with that, but maybe I'm getting mixed messages. But the main Heat Academy, Kim Betty, who runs the Heating Academy, and Nathan Van Gamling, who runs the Beta Teach podcast, and Michael Liebrick and all these people getting together saying that the minimum 10% loss because the flow temperatures are too high. I just wondered, so you think it's not an issue? High flow temperatures are not an issue in condensing boilers?
pushing the boiler into condensing mode is not the issue. It's getting the boiler with 2 heat exchangers in the first place. It would be great to push it into condensing mode all the time, but to be honest, with very variable outside loads, because the temperature changes outside, that's never going to happen. Plus the internal loads change. I think we've probably got more important issues around heat pumps to deal with, because heat pumps demand an entirely different pattern, and we've got to get to terms with that, really.
Exactly that. So I'm just wondering about this heat pump ready business, because
well, I think that's a good point, and it's absolutely true that just taking the boiler out doesn't make the house heat pump ready, and actually just putting in more insulation doesn't make it heat pump ready. There's a lot of issues around the area of the heat distribution, system, the network, the underfloor of the big radiators, lots of stuff.
We'll move on. Thank you for that contribution, Andrew. Ash Crawford.
Hi.
You're on.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, actually. Just one in reference to the site visit for the coordinator. So when I first came into the industry, that's something that I thought would be happening, only to find out that one of the major accreditation schemes provides coordinator services for less than £100 for paths A and B, predominantly for eco. And it became uncompetitive to continue going to site, which threw quite a big problem into site visits. And I've come across many schemes that don't even entertain doing site visit for coordinator projects. So not really a question, more of a statement, that one, I suppose. The second point is the retrofit assessor Path C adopting the principles of a RICS level 3 survey. I seem to be going back and forwards over this for the past 9 months, with retrofit assessments being rejected because they're not adopting the principles of things like costing of measures, likely timescales for necessary work, legal implications of ownership in details, which, in my opinion, retrofit assessors aren't qualified to make those decisions, which is causing quite a big problem for LAD schemes, if I'm honest with you.
Well, actually, PAS does not say do the Path C survey in accordance with the RICS level 3. It says adopt the principles.
Yeah.
And also the PAS sets out a whole load of bullet points about what should be in the assessment at each level, including level C. So I think somebody insisting that it's done absolutely to RICS level 3 is not reading the PAS correctly. And on your first point, actually, Ash, one of the things the steering group is doing in the current amendment of PAS 2035 is inserting a recommendation that the retrofit coordinator should be independent, not a requirement, but a recommendation to try to give the community of retrofit coordinators a bit more kick, a bit more clout in the process by working for the client rather than working for the installer and being valued engineered out of the process.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, I do. And, all the upcoming recommendations that you've spoken about, I wholly agree with. They are positive changes. But I suppose the problem that I've got, I'm looking in my inbox right now, and, there's site visits that aren't really affordable, but because the price has been driven down. And I've got an email that I'm looking at right now, which is a major player in the industry that's demanding that my retrofit assessors are conducting retrofit assessments in line with RICS level 3 surveys. And I've quoted you, and I've gone back to them multiple times and says I've spoken to Peter Rickaby about this, and this is what he says, but they just aren't listening. That there needs to be some kind of bulletin, or there needs to be some kind of update from yourself or from the Retrofit Academy, just highlighting these issues to LAD schemes, because I think it is the LAD schemes that struggle the most with this, not the eco.
Yeah, well, I think the thing about the RICS thing has been discussed in steering group around the current amendment, and I don't know what the outcome was because I wasn't at that bit of the meeting, but I know they did discuss it, so it may change. Yeah. I could go back and check that.
Yeah, if you could get as much information out there as possible, it would really help.
Well, we do now have a direct relationship with a lot of local authorities, which is great, and I think that we can expect that to continue to grow, and we can help create those links between coordinators and those clients. too. So listen, it's gone 4 o'clock, which was the scheduled finish time. There's been a lot of questions and comments in the chat we haven't been able to cover, unfortunately. But we have covered a lot of ground today. I think it was really pleasing that with the case studies that a couple of weeks ago we all thought were going to be extremely problematic and challenging, we seem to have, as we say, worked together to find some common ground, which is brilliant. Thank you to all those who've been involved in that process. Not all of them are present today, but it has been collaborative. We clearly need to do more of that collaboration. For those, you know, with clout and BEIS and Trustmark and elsewhere, let's make sure that, and we'll certainly do what we can to support that. There's also clearly this appetite for more opportunities for you as retrofit coordinators to engage with one another and puzzle over this stuff. We do a huge amount. I suspect we need to perhaps shout about it a little bit more. So I'll talk to my team about how we do that and make sure you all know how to, you know, whether it's PAS Club or the knowledge base or you know, I don't know how we could do much more really, but we'll try and rise to that challenge nonetheless. And the forum, well, it is there. We'll let you know it's there again, and if you're still not using it, we'll do something else. But perhaps a bit of research needed to figure that out. I'd just like to thank you all the speakers, all the panelists, the case studies. The guys put a lot of effort into those, and were very brave, I thought, in stepping forward and talking about real life things, which is what we need. When we started doing these summits 12-18 months ago, we were talking about things being in the future constantly. First it was the PAS was in the future, then it was the funding schemes are in the future. We're in the process now of doing it and delivering large scale, high quality retrofit, or at least many of us are, which is fantastic. And that's what we need to support and continue to encourage. So much more to come. There you go, Kate. The future is now. Yeah. You're glad you left the BBC, aren't you? Brilliant. We'll send these slides around, and the video will be available to those of you who've attended and those who've not attended, and we'll be in touch very soon. So thank you very much. Enjoy your half term, in my case, weekend in others. All the very best.